had the opportunity to meet a lot of you, but I moved here from Las Vegas, Nevada about a year ago. So the reason that I was super excited to do this class was because Brooke is from California and she has been like deep in the trenches, right? And I felt like she was I always wanted to do the Brooke and Nichole show because, because a lot of times people don't know what comprehensive sexuality education is. Or they'll say, what do you have against teaching sex ed? They get all these comments from people emailing. There's nothing wrong with teaching kids sex ed. We need to teach kids sex ed. I agree. We absolutely need to teach sex ed, right? They have some great programs. There was I went on the Davis School District website and looked at their health curriculum to see what it was like. And there's this cute video on maturation that you showed of 5th grade girls. And I watched it and I was like, oh, this is really good. Oh, no, that's, okay, we can do this one. There was a really cute maturation video for 5th grade girls. And I watched it and I thought it was good. So I had my daughter watch it. I sat her down at the kitchen table and I gave her a piece of paper and a pen. And I said, okay, watch this and write down any questions that you have. And so she watched this video and I knew that she would be a little nervous about it. And so at the end, she asked her questions and we had a great conversation. And it was exactly what I thought health education should be, right? And sex ed. A great conversation between the two of us, and I think it was really fun. So it's not that we are against teaching sex ed at all. We are against, or actually let's say it this way, we are for having parents involved and having parents have the right to choose what kind of education their kids get and when and how much, right? So there's a difference between sexual risk avoidance, that's what Brooke talked about, and comprehensive sexuality education. They are two different philosophies of sex education. They are mutually exclusive, and we'll talk about that, but it's really, at the end of tonight, I want you guys to really ask yourselves the question, who do you want teaching your kids about sex? Like, these are real questions you need to ask. Like, do you want the teacher teaching them? Do you want Planned Parenthood teaching them? Do you want to teach them? Do you want their friends to teach them? Where do you want your kids to learn sex ed from? And who do you want to teach them? What do you want your children to be taught about sex ed? These are questions you guys need to answer for yourselves because there are different camps. There are people that legitimately believe that children are sexual beings and that they have a right to pleasure without shame. They teach their kids that viewing pornography is okay. If you want to have an abortion, that's okay, that's your business. There are people who teach their children that. And there are also people who say, you know what, let's prolong your sexual debut as long as possible. We want you to delay this because it has physical consequences, mental consequences, spiritual consequences. And so you need to decide, what do you believe about it? And what do you want your kids to know about it? Now, like I said, I moved here from Nevada about a year ago. And when I was in Nevada, I had the opportunity to be on the board of an organization called Power to Parent. And the way that I got started with that organization was my child was, I homeschooled my kids for a lot of life. And then what my daughter at one point said, I want to go to school. And I thought, okay, fine, this will be a fun experiment so that she can see, you know, what a public school is like. So she went to school, and a few months into the school year, I learned that there was a legislative bill that was being presented that would make it okay for boys to change in the same locker room as girls. Basically, if they that day felt like they wanted to be a girl, that they could go into the girls' locker room and they could change in the girls' locker room. And they didn't have to have separate private stalls to be able to change. It was just, they could go anywhere they wanted at any time. And I had a problem with that because in my opinion, my child's right to privacy matters. And other people might say, well, you know, this other kid, they have the right to their gender expression or whatever. And that's nice, but your liberty ends where my liberty begins. and I get the right to choose where my child's liberty begins and where her privacy is, right? So I had a problem with this bill, and I knew that I needed to do something about it. So I went to the state. I knew when the meeting was and when they were giving public comment, and so I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew that I was mad and that I needed to say something, right? So I went to this legislative meeting and I said, hey, that exact phrase. I said, my liberty ends where your liberty begins. And I don't believe it's right that my daughter's privacy should be sacrificed because someone else feels like they have the right to go into whatever locker room they want, whenever they want. And so that's really when I started to wake up, was I knew that there was something wrong in the schools and that I didn't like that idea. And so and in Nevada, that's now a standing law. They snuck it into a facilities bill, and it went before the state legislature and they passed it. So like Brooke said, there were, in her case, 400 people speaking against it and like 4 people for that bill in California. In Nevada, there were over 200 parents that showed up to that meeting to speak against that bill, and only a few people that were for it. I'm not even sure that they were parents. I think they were members of Planned Parenthood and psychists, things like that. At any rate, I say that just to let you know that it comes up in the legislature, and it's coming our way. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other piece that Brooke showed you in the, I put this on here so that you guys, so I could show this to you so that you would know that I wasn't making this up. But another book on the Nevada laws is that children have the right to an abortion without parental notification or consent. Now, the reason that that's important is because it's basically saying that you as a parent do not have the right to know your child's medical history, so that they can go in at any time and they can get an abortion and you will never find out. And that's really dangerous because you, like, let's say your daughter goes in and gets an abortion, and then the next day she has a cheer competition and she starts bleeding out. And you're thinking, oh, she's just on her period. You know, it's no big deal. She might be, she'll be fine. But what you don't know is what happened the day before, right? So how can you get her the correct medical treatment if you don't know what she's going through? So from a parental rights perspective, this is just important for you guys to know that there are these types of books on the law. And I put it up there just so you guys could see that I'm not making this up. That what's getting pushed out there is the idea that teenagers are sexual beings and that they have a right to pleasure, they have a right to sex, and that should be confidential because it's just their what do you call it? Just their right. So just know that that's on the books in Nevada. AB 295. Okay. Brooke went through a lot of this, so I will kind of skim through because I want to get to the Nevada laws so that you guys can see what's going on. I wanted to just go through the definitions really quickly because so that you know the terminology for it. So I think we've kind of done the sexual risk avoidance, comprehensive sexuality education, opt-in and opt-out. Now this is really important to know because this is how the laws start to get changed and how comprehensive sex ed starts to come into a state. So opt-in means that a school must obtain written permission from the parent to teach the sex ed portion of the health curriculum. So parents have access to the information taught to their children. And that's what Utah law is right now, that in order for your child to receive health education, you have to sign a permission form that says you opt in. So you're giving your permission for your child to be taught sex education. And they have to have that signed permission form. Otherwise, they can't be taught sex ed. So that's opt-in. That's what we were fighting for in Nevada. So this is actually from a school board meeting when there was a group that came in that wanted to change the law from opt-in to opt-out. 800 people showed up at that school board meeting and gave public comment until 11 o'clock at night, fighting for opt-in. And they Thankfully, the school board went with opt-in, and Nevada still has opt-in, or Clark County School District still has opt-in. But this is absolutely what you want as a parent. You want to maintain this control, that you have to sign a permission slip, and that you will be informed when your child will be taught sex ed, and you have a right to see what they will be taught in sex ed. Now, opt-out is what all the states are starting to move towards, in the right, or in the name of the sexual rights that a teenager has, that a school does not need to notify you as a parent when sex ed is going to be taught. It can be taught in any class at any time, and that you don't have access to the curriculum. It also allows outside vendors to come in, like Planned Parenthood, to teach sex ed, and they're not accountable to parents. So you don't know what's taught or when it's taught. So this is really bad. You do not want opt-out. And what this would mean would be that you would have to go in to a school and say, I am opting my child out of this. And it's really hard to do. It takes a lot of work. And so it's not a situation that you want. And in a lot of states, they're trying to change the opt-in laws to opt-out. And we'll get a little bit more into that. But it's a strategy for bringing comprehensive sex ed into the classroom. So SRA, we kind of already went over this. It's avoidance. It's telling your children to prolong sex as long as possible, right? Until they're married, until they're in a long-term serious relationship, like just prolong that sexual debut, that you don't want them to engage in this risky behavior. And okay, I talked about the maturation video. That what Utah has is, I think, is really great. It talks about biology. It talks about the normal development. I mean, I think, and you're welcome to review your curriculum on your websites, but from what I've seen, I really like the Utah curriculum that they have. So just so you guys know, I know some of you are in different school districts, like I'm in the Davis School District, but every school district should put this, they have this information on the website, on their district website. So whatever school district you're in, like I think you said you're in Weber School District, right? So you could go to Weber School District's website and you could type in health education, and it will bring up some of the primary and secondary resources, and they should be available for you to review. So like in Davis School District, you can type Davis School District, and this is actually the website that you can go to that has the elementary health education, and you can review it yourself. And when I first moved here, I was all guns a-blazing, like trying to figure out what Utah's laws were and what they were teaching. So I emailed my school board rep and I said, how do I get to see the sex ed curriculum? How do I know who's on the sex ed advisory committee? And they were, just like not ready for me. So she said, well, let me refer you to the health curriculum director. And he was lovely. He was so kind. He was definitely not ready for me. But he said, you know what, Nichole? Some parents think we teach not enough sex ed. Some parents think we teach too much sex ed. And some parents think we teach just the right amount. And I thought that was a really great answer, because it brings it back to the parent making the decision. That you as the parent have the right to decide, is your school district teaching too much sex ed? Are they teaching not enough sex ed? Or are they teaching just the right amount? If you feel like they're teaching too much sex ed, you have the right to opt them out. So you can go in and say, I don't want my child taught any of this. I'm opting them out. You hand them a letter, and then when that curriculum comes up, you can pull your child out of class, and they'll take your child out of class. If you think they're teaching just the right amount, rock on. Good on you for knowing what they're teaching. And if you don't think they're teaching enough and you want to teach comprehensive sex ed, you can do that at home. And so there are a lot of resources out there. Like I'm sure you can imagine, right? That there are plenty of resources available online to teach whatever you would like to teach your kids about sex. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. Comprehensive sex ed, and we've talked about it, that it's a rights-based approach. That it says that children should be able to enjoy their sexuality physically, emotionally, individually, and in relationships. So there are two different schools of thought, right? And we'll kind of go into that. And this was another one that was brought up in Washoe County in Nevada. This was a handout that they were proposing be used. But I'm just curious, like, is that something you want your 5th grader to see? Like, so I mean, like, as you're going along, you know, just ask yourself the questions, like, do I want my 5th grader to see this? Do I want my kindergartner to see this? Do I want my 7th grader to see this? Does this encourage exploration? Because, you know, do I want my kid to explore sex? You know, how do I feel about all this? So Brooke showed this one also. Again, it was used in California, and it also came up in Nevada, Washoe County School District, Nevada. So just curious, if you're like a 7th grader, because I think this was proposed to middle schoolers, if you're a 7th grader and you're looking at this, like, would you start asking yourself questions like, well, how does that work? And just like when you're asking yourself like questions like, anus to penis. Never thought about that before. Wonder what that would be like. Is this, you know what I mean? It's just encouraging, it's encouraging questions. And quite frankly, I don't want my 7th grader to see this. I don't think she's ready for it emotionally. So, you know, again, just ask yourselves the question, do you want your kids to be taught this? Some people do because, you know, they're fighting for this, I guess. But I would say that most parents would say, wait a second, I know my kid the best. I know what they're ready for, and I don't want my kid to be taught this. This I just put up there because it's talking about all the different types of sex and things like that. What I wanted you to see is right here where it says teen talk, middle school. So this is middle school curriculum. And I'm just putting it up there so you can ask yourself, do I want my middle schooler to fill out this kind of a worksheet? Okay, also middle school. Do you really want, so first off, this is a slide on how to put on a condom, which is one piece of it. But then what they do in the lesson plans is they take out bananas or they take out their model, and then they have the kids come up and they do races to see who can put the condom on the banana fastest, or who can, they have 2 models set up and they put people side by side and say, who can put the condom on the banana or the male model the fastest? And you just think, you know, do I really want my 7th grader, my 11th grader, you know, is that the type of thing I want them to practice on? Because what's going on in their mind as they're seeing this slide and as they're practicing and doing these races? Like what kind of things is that encouraging? Like in my mind, I would submit that that's encouraging exploration, right? Like curiosity, right? Wouldn't that just make you be like, I didn't ever know that before. Wonder how that works. Maybe I want to try that. And no, I'm just saying, like, these are things that you want to think about because this is real sex ed curriculum that's being taught in California, in Nevada, and that's being proposed here in Utah. And we'll get to that in just a second. So again, educator resources. So I don't know if you can see, but just all of these things. Do you want your kid to be talking about like oral sex on a vulva without a dental dam? Oral sex on an anus without a dental dam? And then they go in and talk about where do you find a dental dam? And you can get flavored ones. And here's where you can get the flavored ones. And here's how you use it. I mean, I'm just saying this is what your children are going to learn in a comprehensive sex ed program. Do you want your children to be taught this? If yes, you don't have to do anything because it's coming. But if you don't, then this is where we need to get involved a little bit and say, oh, no. And that's why I'm here right now, is because I'm trying to get involved saying, I don't want my kid taught this. And I'm thinking there are a bunch of parents that don't want this taught to their kids either. So I'm hoping that we can work together, if this is not your style, so that we can prevent this from coming down in Utah because it's on the docket. How do I know? Because this is what they're teaching in Granite. This got through their sex ed advisory committee. So every school district has, by mandate, a sex ed advisory committee where parents and teachers sit together and they look at curriculum that's being proposed in that district. So these parents and these teachers looked at these resources and they said, yeah, this is okay. We're going to refer kids to Planned Parenthood. So this is something that's important because if you don't want this kind of stuff in your school district, then you need to do something like look at what curriculum is being taught and maybe ask to sit on your school district's sex ed advisory committee. And that is coming up for review in every school district. They do it in August and September, where you have the chance to say, I want to sit and I want to review this curriculum. And I want to see what is going to be taught in schools. Just to give you some perspective, in Las Vegas, when I was there, their sex ed advisory committee consisted of some parents that we knew, and some of the other people who had pushed their way on was the sister-in-law to the overall director of Planned Parenthood, who had a tattoo on her arm commemorating her first abortion, celebrating her first abortion. And that was the type of person who was reviewing the curriculum that was coming into schools, that would ultimately funnel kids to Planned Parenthood. Like, yeah, hey, we'll give you free contraceptives. Your parents never have to know about it. You get pregnant? No worries. You can get an abortion. Your parents never have to know about it. It's confidential. It's fast. It's easy. So this is what's starting to come down. This is also in Granite. This got through their sex ed advisory committee. So they're telling kids, like, oh, it's okay. Like, if you have sex, you know, and you weren't using a condom, like, you can go get this pill and you'll be okay. So you can still have sex and it's going to be okay because you can use this emergency contraceptive and then it'll make sure that you don't get pregnant. Teaching them the withdrawal method. Again, I would submit that this is against the law in Utah, and why or how it got through Granite Sex Ed Advisory Committee, I don't know. But all I know is that when I first moved here, this is one of the first things that was sent to me as a heads up, like, hey, just so you know, this is in Granite. And that's when I lost it and I emailed it to my school board rep and said, hey, is this going on in DSD? Can you tell me? And she's like, oh, I don't know, but I'm going to refer you to the head of the health department. And then I said, okay, head of the health department, is this being taught in Davis County School District? And I sent him about 10 pictures and he's like, oh, this slide, and this slide, no, but this slide, and this slide, yes. You know, we don't put Planned Parenthood on ours in Davis County, but some of the other slides they did. So this is important to know, and you probably saw some of these names in Brooke's presentation. You say, well, who is pushing for CSE? Because do you really see a lot of parents like going to school board meetings and standing up during public comment and saying, I want my kid to know how to use a dental dam on an anus? I've never heard that before, right? I mean, I'm being for real, like, where are the parents who are saying this? Because I would submit that most parents are saying, oh, no. We're not going to talk about that. I'm going to teach my kid how to say, hell no, don't touch me, right? Get away from me. Like, my 7th grader's not going to hear about any of this stuff because I tell her all the time, someone comes at you, you tell them to get away, don't touch you. You know, whatever it is, but we are very clear, you don't touch me, right? Okay, anyway, so you'll see these groups, these are the groups who are really pushing for CSE. And I pointed out because these are not parent groups. These are for-profit organizations. These are not charitable organizations that love your children and hope that your children have a great life. These organizations have very clear agendas, and they make a lot of money from the stuff that they do. So we need to know about them. Like, for example, this is a great one. This is so deep, I don't even know how to start this. Psychus. Notice their tagline right here. Sex Ed for Social Change. That is the name of this organization. They are trying to use sex ed for social change. Now, what are the implications of that? What other groups are pushing for social change? Are they parent groups? Are they people who love your kids, who know your kids? They're groups who have a special interest ideologies. So this is a group, even from its very name, Sex Ed for Social Change. Again, these are not parents going up to a school board meeting to say, I want you guys to come in to teach my kids more about having sex, right? Here's another piece that's important. Try to say, okay, so this was a webinar that was done where they were talking about the 2021 legislation, but look at who they're working with, ACLU and Planned Parenthood, right? They're saying, yay, you guys, you're working together, you're doing such a good job, yay. So these are the groups you need to understand that are pushing this. Okay, in that legislative training, they're saying this is their strategy. Their strategy for pushing these bills into different states is they stay away from saying the word sex and they focus on healthy relationships. Because how can you be opposed to teaching healthy relationships, right? We all care about having healthy relationships. So we're not going to use the term sex ed. We're going to say, we're going to go into schools and we're going to teach them healthy relationships. So they're sneaking it in that way. And then abuse prevention. Oh, how could you be against abuse prevention? You know, that's what this is about, right? So they're trying to use, they're hijacking good terms and using them to push this into schools. And I'll give you some specific examples. So again, in this Sex Ed for Social Change, this legislative outlook, this was a national webinar. This wasn't a Utah, this was national. And in this national webinar, check this out. They said, we've got some partners in Utah that are working on some really interesting legislation, talking about HB 177. So CICUS, this national group for social change, was working with partners in Utah to push this bill, HB 177. So when we say, oh, that's not in Utah, we don't need to worry about it. Well, CICUS, Sex Ed for Social Change, by their own admission, is working on trying to pass legislation in Utah. Okay, so here's what came up. So this is from them. I'm just using their slides. I'm not using anything that's from us. This is their words, and so they're saying healthy relationships, abuse prevention. That's the bill that we're pushing in there, again, for social change. Okay, so we'll get into that. Maybe I should come back to that. So this was, so HB 177, maybe I'll go, I guess I didn't pull it up. But HB 177 basically says that they were going to use the word consent, that they were saying children needed to know how to consent to having sex. So the interesting part about this bill was that that's an affirmative statement. Like, how do I give permission to have sex, right? But in Utah, the standard is that it's illegal for a minor to have sex. And we instead have refusal skills of how to say no, right? So our law says we teach children to say no, don't touch me, instead of teaching them to say yes to certain acts. Does that make sense? The difference? And stop me if you guys have questions or if I'm not explaining this very well. But this whole bill was woven around the idea that we needed to teach children to consent in the name of preventing sexual violence. That somehow by teaching them to say yes, we were going to prevent sexual violence. So I'm just curious, how do you guys feel about that? Does that make sense? So the interesting part of this was that in 2018, the USBE, so the Utah State Board of Education, revised its curriculum standards to make sure that there was that we really dove in and taught refusal skills, that we taught about human trafficking. Let's see. Okay, so these were the two documents that the Utah State Board of Education, nowhere. It's supposed to say, nowhere do we teach youth how to consent as a way of protecting themselves. Instead, the USBE made these documents that said this was to prevent human trafficking, and talking about ways to prevent human trafficking and ways to prevent child sex abuse by teaching the kids to say no, because that's what it was based on, refusal skills. Okay, now consent, I want you to see this. Okay, so this is a really fun article. When this came out, I just jumped for joy and celebrated, because it was at this point that I could help prove to people what was going down. So HB 177, lawmakers debate whether consent should be taught in Utah's sex ed classes. Oh, it's in the name of abuse prevention. Oh, we're not trying to teach them more about having sex. But guess who came out and spoke affirmatively in response to this bill? Planned Parenthood, right? Oh, we're not trying to teach comprehensive sex ed. Oh no, we're just trying to prevent sex abuse, right? Okay, so it gets even better. So Planned Parenthood's consent video, we have to watch this just because you'll get a kick out of this. Oops, is this, oh darn it, okay. I'm gonna have to, because this is so funny, you guys.
You click on present, I think it will activate it.
Well, it didn't hyperlink it though when it was in present. So I'm just gonna do it this way. Okay, so this is Planned Parenthood. Those are my kids. That's, yeah, thank you. That's where you're supposed to say, aw, right? Try it again. Those are my kids. Aww, thank you. Okay. This is the
How do you know
best.
for sure someone wants to have sex with you? Well, actually, there's only one way. They need to tell you. You need to have consent. But what does consent really mean? Consent means both parties are really truly into what's going on. This means that nobody is being guilted or pressured into doing anything. Silence does not equal consent. Some people think it's not rape unless there's fighting, screaming, or someone yelling no, but that's not true. Communication doesn't always happen with words. Body language can say a lot if you pay attention. Are they leaning in or are they pulling away? Do they look happy or do they look uncomfortable? Are they kissing you back or are they just staying kind of still? You have to pay attention to all the signals. This includes body language and words. No one can read minds, so it's always good to talk about it. Asking for consent doesn't have to be awkward. Asking for consent can actually be kind of sexy.
Want to show me your bedroom?
Show me where you want me to touch you.
Do you want to help me take these clothes off?
So, let's break this consent thing way down. 1, everyone's clear about what's about to happen next, and they're happy about it. If you're making out with someone for the first time and you want to go further, check in first.
Can I take your shirt off?
Want to try something different?
2, everyone in the situation has to feel free to be able to say no without being pressured or hassled. It's not cool to pressure people into doing stuff they're obviously uncomfortable with, or make them feel bad for saying no or wanting to stop things. Being pushy or manipulative makes for some pretty bad sex. And obviously, if a person is drunk, high, passed out, or asleep, it's not okay to do sexual stuff with them. They can't consent when wasted or unconscious. So doing this is actually great. 3, be honest about whether or not you're on birth control, have an STD, or having sex with other people. Wouldn't you want to know that? If you're going to get naked with someone, you have to have trust and honesty. 4, saying yes to sex once doesn't mean you're saying yes to it forever. It may be tough to pause in the middle of some super sweet action, but your partner has the right to stop at any time. And 5, sex is all about connections and pleasure, right? If everyone feels respect, sex will be much better for both of you. We all deserve a safe, pleasurable, and awesome sex life. The more respect.
I'm just gonna pause it right there because you get the idea, right? So again, I want you to ask yourselves the question, do you want your kids to be taught this in Utah schools? Yeah, go ahead.
Is that video being offered in the 5th grade and 7th grade curriculum?
In some other states, but this is what they were pushing for in HB 177, is that kids would be taught about consent. Now, this is a really good question because this is, I think, well, most people don't understand. Even the legislators were not understanding how this works. Okay, let me go back to this. So what this does, well, HB 177, again, the bill that came up about consent, what that would do, set a precedent that schools would affirmatively have to teach you how to consent to a sexual act. Now, different schools would use different resources, and some of those would go through the Sex Ed Advisory Committee, but this would be an option that would be available, depending on what teacher wanted to use, like as long as that was falling under teaching consent. So some teachers would choose to use it and some wouldn't. So it's a good question, but I just put that up to illustrate that's one example of what teaching consent is. And if you don't know what curriculum is being taught by your teacher, maybe your kid would see this one day.
Yeah, I would say, and even the kids are probably not allowed to leave the classroom if they're not comfortable with it, right? You can learn about consent, but you can't leave the list.
Well,
Or is that true?
that's a great question also. In Utah, we have opt-in laws. And so, people have the right to opt out of curriculum also. So they would have the right to opt out of this if they wanted. But maybe some kids wouldn't know that they could leave.
That's what I'm saying, is would a child be able to leave the classroom? Would they be able to say, I'm not good with this? I don't want to give my consent to learn about this.
Yeah, go Brooke.
And that's exactly right. The teacher can show whatever they want as long as they say it's a consent video. And that's how stuff gets in. But also teachers, there's a breakdown in communication such that the teachers would say, oh, I didn't know that the district had pulled out this stuff about oral sex. And my friend who was giving the lesson, her daughter 2 years later said, Mom, do I really have to have a man's penis in my mouth? She's like, what? Where did you hear that? And they said, during class. And they went to the teacher and said, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to pull that page out of the curriculum. And so there's a breakdown. If you show consent, that they can teach that teachers can just put this in. So that's why.
Mm-hmm. So that's why it matters who's on your Sex Ed Advisory Committee. So, it is a great question, but the thing that a lot of people don't understand and legislators don't understand is that curriculum is brought in via funding from often the federal level. And what the federal government will do, they will offer a school district money and they will say, okay, guys, I'm going to give you some money and you get to spend this money. And so the school district's going, yay. But then the federal government says, but there's a caveat to this. You have to spend this money at the store that I take you to, and you can only spend it on this shelf, on the curriculum that's on this shelf. So they basically only make a few different curriculums available to schools, and schools have to choose one of them. So it's going to vary by school district. It will vary by teacher. And oftentimes these types of videos are supplemental resources. And so a teacher can voluntarily bring those in, even if they're not approved by the school district, if that makes sense. So this is really important because Brian King is a legislator. And this, I put it up here so that you understand that the legislators do not know how this process works, because look at what he says. If the bill passes, it will be the State Board of Education, I believe, who will develop this curriculum. Does our State Board of Education develop curriculum? No. This guy has no idea what he's saying. And I say that respectfully, but it's showing you the legislators do not know. The USBE sets standards and laws for what will be applied or how it will be applied in classrooms, but they don't do curriculum. That's developed by other organizations like Planned Parenthood, SICUS, Advocates for Youth. That's how Planned Parenthood makes its money. That's how SICUS makes its money. That's how Advocates for Youth makes its money, is by a school district going to them and buying the curriculum from them and bringing it into the classroom. That's why they're so excited about marketing their sex ed to different school districts and getting CSE passed in different states, because then that means money opportunity to them, because the states will come to them, or the districts will come and buy their curriculum. And that's just one way that they make their money. So I put this up there because that's why it's so important for you guys to be informed, that this legislation know how it works, but you guys need to know how this works. So consent is a euphemism for comprehensive sex ed that activist organizations like Planned Parenthood, SICUS, again, all these people use it to sneak CSE in under the guise of, we're going to protect people by teaching them consent. We're going to decrease sexual violence by teaching people what consent means. But really, consent is teaching you how to say yes to something, right? So our core standards right now teach kids how to say no. So would you rather teach your kids how to say yes or teach them how to say no? And these are questions that you need to answer for yourself, because this is about what you as a parent establish as your values and who you want teaching your kids about sex and what you want them to know about sex. But you better believe I am not going to teach my 7th grader how to consent to a sex act. Okay, that's just me. But
Nicole, do you
Yeah.
mention that they also wanted to lower the age that they started teaching sex ed in this legislation?
I didn't. It's a
That
7th
is
grade.
part-
Yeah.
That is part of what the legislation was, and they removed that piece. But that was originally,
I think
that was originally part of this.
Yeah.
And then it was, first grade, and then they moved it back up to 7, but that's still a year earlier, because it was 8.
Yeah, so again, they're trying to sneak it in sooner and sooner. Now, this is a different sex ed organization, Advocates for Youth. Now, I put the link up here, and you guys can go in and watch it yourselves, but this is Amaze, and this is teaching your child about porn, how to talk to your kids about porn. Now, there are different philosophies. I won't play this one for you, but it's a fun watch too.
And there's a link there, just so you know, there's a link to this whole presentation right here, so you can get this.
So, okay, yeah. Yeah.
This is diabolically clever.
It is.
I was in advertising for years, and that presentation, we were laughing at it. It was brilliant. There is sociology, psychology, behavioral psychology. That video is crafted, because if you put that on paper, everything they said is completely makes sense. You know, you want consent where it's rape. You don't want to do anything with anyone that's passed out. You want to respect each other. Everything they say in there is 100% respectful of other people. But what's crafted is that it's grooming, like you said. If you take out all of the suggestive sexual material, it's fine to teach kids that. You know? But it's that crafting that makes it so diabolically evil, because they can slip it in, and it's hard to argue. Like you said, well, what's wrong with not raping a girl?
Yeah, exactly.
You know? It's frightening to me. That is really well done and really, like I said, diabolically clever.
Yeah, and so it gets really deep. And so bear with me while I try to explain this to you. But going back to the title, Sex Ed for Social Change, there is an agenda behind that. And I'm going to try to explain it the best I can. But did you notice that most of the couples in that consent video were gay, lesbian, bisexual, whatever? So the argument for comprehensive sexuality education is that it needs to be inclusive. That if you feel gay, lesbian, bisexual, whatever the 63 other terms are that go along with it, you need to be represented, or you want to be represented in sex ed. And that these Sex Ed for Social Change is meant to help these people in this community feel represented in their sex ed curriculum. Now, it gets even deeper than that, because it gets into, well, your parents may not be supportive of that, right? So we're going to give you a safe space in our classroom where you can feel represented, where you can explore your sexual feelings, where you can decide if you're gay or lesbian or bisexual. And your parents don't need to know, because that's personal. And so the teachers, what they really do is, or this, I should say, psychus, is trying to create an environment where kids can explore their sexuality in the absence of their parents. And so it does encourage exploration in the name of inclusivity. Does that make sense? So there, and again, this is what people genuinely believe. They genuinely believe that students have a right to explore their sexuality in the absence of their parents, that they need to figure out who they are, and that they have a right to feel represented and safe. And so that's the premise of their social change, is they want to create that safe space. But they do it, this is where I would argue, in the absence of parents, that the parents don't know what the curriculum is. They don't know what their kids are exploring. So that's where I say, you know what, it's good to talk with your kid, about these subjects, but you should be involved in that conversation. It shouldn't be the teacher creating a safe space where you're cut out of the loop and that you don't know what they're being exposed to or what they think or feel about something. So that's where it's really important that when your kids come home, you ask them about the videos that they're watching. Like, hey, tell me about the videos that you saw in class today. Did anything sound weird? Did anything make you uncomfortable? Is there anything that you want to talk about? So it's kind of going back to those ideas. What do you want your kids to know about sex? And who do you want teaching them? Like, do you want them to explore in a vacuum without you, where you've got this group talking about social change and you want them to explore all 63 genders to decide which one fits them that day? Or do you want to have these conversations with them in your home? Do you want them to explore and have the right to get pregnant and go get an abortion without your notification or consent? Or do you want to be involved every step of the way, knowing what's going on, talking with them about what they're deciding, exploring with them their feelings, answering their questions, things like that. So now this one, Advocates for Youth, real quick. This is where they come out right at the 4-minute mark. Kids have a right to pleasure without shame. They have a right to it. It's their right. They're sexual beings. So this is the premise of comprehensive sex ed. That's what this camp believes. And that's what they're trying to bring into Utah schools, right? Because they showed you in that 2021 legislation. Okay, the other one was, how to search for porn. Okay, porn is natural. There's a part for it, or it's okay to watch porn. And so these guys talk about how to search for ethical porn. Ethical porn is when you give consent and you're not being raped. So make sure that when you're searching for porn, you're looking for ethical porn where those actors or whatever you call them are being paid, because that's ethical porn. So that's what they're teaching, this Advocates for Youth. You can watch the video. Like, I am not making this up. You can go on Facebook, watch it yourself. This is what they are teaching children. Now, they don't teach them that when kids view porn, they get a dopamine hit. For your youth. They're not teaching your kid about how their brain chemistry is getting messed up, or how they're going to become an addict, right? That they may not have healthy relationships later on because of their brain chemistry is being messed up. So this is what these sex ed people are coming in trying to teach in the name of social justice and inclusion and making sure that kids have a right to their feelings and who they are. I would submit I have the right to teach my kid not to view porn at all in the name of safety, because here's the killer. At 35, young people, because their brain is still developing into their 20s, and so they'll make risky decisions. Okay, so can you see how it's like the pot calling the kettle black? Like that they're trying to guide them through because their brains are still developing and they're going to make risky decisions. And they're telling them it's okay to view porn and not telling them the consequences. So there's just a lot to this, but that's just one of the pieces. I won't play this. The link is there if you want to watch it, but it's basically the Planned Parenthood business model. She is a former abortion clinic director, and she's not the only one that I've heard say this. I've read articles from other abortion clinic directors. Planned Parenthood makes a crazy amount of money from selling their curriculum to a school district. So a school district, remember, they're given money. Oh, I have all this money I get to spend on sex ed, but I have to spend it on comprehensive sex ed. And I know about Planned Parenthood, so I'm going to buy their sex ed program, right? So Planned Parenthood is paid to come in and teach your kids sex ed. And you know how else they make money? When your kid goes in and gets condoms from them or gets birth control from them. Your kid can go in confidentially. Remember, did you see that granite slide showing your kids where to go? They can go in, get these contraceptives for free, and Planned Parenthood gets reimbursed, right, by the state or federal government.
So we're paying for it.
Exactly. These free confidential services. Oh, you think you might have an STD? No problem. Come in and get tested. We can do it confidentially. No, and it's free. So how do they make their money? STD testing. Oh, you guys got pregnant. Oh, the birth control didn't work. You forgot to take some pills. Oh, no problem. You can come in and get an abortion. It's completely confidential and it's free, right? So they are making tons of money all the way through this. So to your point, it is diabolical because they are a for-profit organization. They are not out there as a nonprofit because they have your kid's best interest in mind. They are a money-making machine, and their goal is to report earnings, right? Because what business person doesn't want to make money? If they had your kid's best interest in mind, they would be a C3, right?
So a kid can go in and get a free abortion or free whatever, but yet they can't sign a loan on a car, even if they have a job under the age of 18.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That makes total sense.
That's confidential, not as COVID vaccination.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother story, but we can get into that another week. But
just so you know, I just Googled Amaze, and their website says age-appropriate info on puberty for tweens and their parents. It takes the awkwardness out of sex ed. Real info in fun animated videos.
Yeah, see?
So it's like I said, it's just disgusting. It's
Yeah.
diabolical.
So why is it age appropriate? Because I say it's age appropriate, right? So
It's a
yeah.
cartoon.
In a what?
In our state, like Moss and her connection.
Oh, oh, I don't even know her connection specifically.
It's interesting 'cause she's, you know, in past, you know, like she pushed like her cut off my parents for him not to, and just connections there, and then even they have their school program, if you remember. And this last legislation session, she's in the music.
Oh yeah,
How she spoke out, but she was homeschooling.
yeah.
So it was just funny how she's like, I wish I was taught things that she would have never been taught in the school system.
Yeah,
when she was homeschooled.
Because if you were taught consent, then that means that you would have known how to refuse something, right? So how does teaching someone how to say yes? Yeah.
So, when we need to get her, like, election.
Yeah.
Um,
She emailed me, but then when I asked questions, you know.
Okay, so this is super important because this is what Brooke was talking about. This bill came dangerously close to being passed, right? So this bill that was clearly backed by Planned Parenthood by their own admission, that was backed by SICUS by their own admission saying, hey, we got these connections in Utah, we're trying to push this bill through. This is how close it came to being passed. So look at where your legislator falls. Did your legislator vote yes, or did they vote no?
Mine's in the wrong category.
Mine too.
Yeah, no, yeah. So this is super important, guys, because you need to know how your legislator is voting.
Ballard vote for it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, see, that's not the only thing she's voting for.
Yeah, I know.
We'll get to that later. Okay, so I'm putting this up there because as constituents, if you want your kids to be taught comprehensive sex ed in the classroom, you don't have to do anything because look at how close it is to getting here. We barely fought this off. This was a lot of effort, right? Elizabeth, she would have voted no.
Moss would have voted yes.
Well, that's Jefferson Moss.
Oh, other Moss, okay.
Yeah. So you guys just want to know this because it tells you, like, is your representative really representing your vote?
Why would a quote conservative or Republican? I mean, what would their reasoning be? Have you talked to any of them? Like, why would they?
Oh, I have
I
lots of.
understand why the Mosses, people like that would vote for it, but like,
Okay, one, they don't know any better because they don't know what comprehensive sex ed means. And that's why we're trying to explain that to you, that there are two different definitions of sex ed. One is sexual risk avoidance and one is comprehensive sex ed. And a lot of times people will say, oh, you're just a pearl clutcher if you don't want sex ed taught in the classroom. It's like, whoa, right? I'm okay with sex ed if it's sexual risk avoidance and if I'm teaching my kid to say hell no. But I have a problem with teaching my kid to say yes. And by the way, this sex ed for social change is all about, it also encompasses pedophiles, meaning pedophiles have a right to their sexual identity as well. And so it's trying to validate the pedophiles and bring them in. Like, I don't know if you've noticed all the layers of the flags that are out there, but one of those stripes is for pedophiles and pushing for their rights. And if you research the TED Talks on pedophilia, it says that pedophilia is classified as a legitimate form of sexual exploration. And so it is starting to teach. So the reason why pedophilias want consent is because if they find a 12-year-old that's really into them, they want that 12-year-old to be able to consent to them. So when we talk about grooming, this is setting the stage for social change. Pedophilia wants to have an equal say in this, right? So I would submit to you that it's not necessarily the parents that are going in and saying, I want my kid to be taught consent. It's the pedophiles are saying, I want your kids to be taught consent, right? So again, if you want that for your kids, all you have to do is do nothing, because it's almost here. It's going to come up again in this legislative cycle. If this is something you don't want, you need to know how to email your legislators and say, I am a parent, I am a constituent, this is my child and it is my money, and I want you to vote no on this bill. I know that consent is a segue for CSE. I know that consent would allow Planned Parenthood to come into the classroom, and I do not want that for my child.
Do you
Yes.
have something that we can send to some of these people?
Well,
A few of them, I know them, and I know that, I look at a name up there and go, that's not possible, but it's that they don't know maybe.
well, see,
So
this is,
how do we teach them? I mean, do you have stuff put together for us, or do we have to
well,
just go up there and dig all this up? Because I will.
great question. So the short answer is we will keep you posted. So in this last legislative cycle, are you signed up for our email updates?
Yes.
Okay, so what we'll do is send out an email update that says, hey guys, HB 177, it's back. And now they have all these people who are testifying that if you don't pass this bill, then you're okay with people being sexually assaulted. But now you know better than that Utah already has core standards that teach sexual refusal skills to say no, right? Not to say yes. But so we'll tell you when it's time to say, okay, you need to email your rep right now, and you need to tell them that you are their constituent, that you are a parent, and that you want them to vote no. Yeah.
I think his idea is fabulous, to educate them before they're inundated with all of the laws,
That's true.
and to get a group of constituents together, and we can give you a presentation with all of this information, consolidate it into something short, so that they're ready,
Because I think I could go to this person's house and sit down with them as a friend. No,
That-
Ray Ward, oh, yeah, Ray Ward,
know
Kelly
him.
Miles,
And
Okay.
Melissa Ballard, I mean,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I know her.
She lives
So I
across
think
the
we could
street
talk
from my
to them and say,
sister-in-law.
hey, yeah, you're not, this isn't you here.
I also think something was interesting. We were talking with John Johnson, and Senator John Johnson's the head of the Education Committee, and he's fantastic. And we mentioned we were, working on, pushing back on CSE. He's like, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. Those bills never passed committee. We said, where were you sleeping the last legislative session?
This
It
one-
passed. It was
this
on the
one
floor.
Past
He was like,
committee,
"What?"
it was up for
He
debate.
had no idea, 'cause they think, the legislators, they think we're safe. So if you know very, very strong, good legislators who understand, go tell them it was this close. So we went to John Johnson, we're like, oh no, you could have joined us on this right now. So now he knows how close it was, and he's a senator, state.
Over the Education Committee on the Senate.
So he was, but so it never got to the Senate. It never got.
No, it didn't pass the House.
So he didn't know how close it was. So we have to tell our senators as well, they don't know. And there's really good people who think, oh, this will never happen in Utah.
And they just
And they
think,
don't
oh, all is well, and so they don't do anything.
Yeah.
Right? And again, if you're okay with that, then you don't have to do anything because it's here,
So
right?
how do we send a thank you to those ones that voted?
You just
And send
email your legislator and say, thank you for voting against this. My heck, this was an awful bill. And I appreciate that you had the good sense to respect parents and not
I
have
think
them.
they need to be told as well. We
Thank you.
appreciate
Yes, thank you. I'm not very good at that part, but
Because-
thank you. Yes, you're right.
And how they phrased this bill was that two BYU students, two girl BYU students are proposing this to me. She's like, one was like my granddaughter's friend, and So they put all this local whatever to it, and they don't say who's behind it. I don't know who those girls were, but that's how she was presenting it.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick, but this is another one. I've been told by multiple sources, this bill comes up every year, meaning she brings it up over and over and over again. And what's it under the guys? Healthy lifestyle amendments, because who's opposed to healthy lifestyle amendments, right? You'd have to be a jerk to fight against healthy lifestyle amendments, right? So this is the narrative that they're spinning. And this talks about consent. So here's where it talks about consent, brings in, so the underlines are what it changed. So healthy relationships, because you're a jerk if you're against teaching healthy relationships, right? And then consent, this is where it talks about consent. But here's the other piece that it takes out. So it talks about promoting getting married and keeping sex in marriage. And then here's where it talks about the use of contraceptive methods. So right now, Utah doesn't talk about using contraceptive methods because they say no, prolong your sexual debut as long as possible. But what they want to do is try to sneak it in under, but just in case you are having sex, here are some condoms. Or here, let's talk about condoms. But then that's where you get in the whole, like, here's how you put in a condom. Here's a condom race. Oh, you need some condoms? Let's go to Planned Parenthood. I mean, it's a slippery slope. You just sneak it in a little bit. Oh, but we just should tell them about contraceptives just in case they are sexually active, right?
They already can teach about contraceptives. They can't show pictures. They can't model it. So it's all in the code too.
Well, but this is where they wanted to amend the code to change it, to bring in more, right? Because if we can just get our foot in the door just a little bit, this legislative session will get this line in. And the next legislative session.
Because they're saying right there they took out abstinence and fidelity in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have wives and husbands? Because are they cool with their husbands and wives screwing around? Because that's what they took out.
Okay, well, but see, this is a great question. Like, how many people do you see lobbying for this? Like saying, yeah, I want this taught to my kids, right? So it's the organizations and the special interest groups. It's not the parents. It's not the constituents. That's why it's so important for the constituents to stand up and say something. We are the voters. These are our children. This is our money. You need to listen to us. And unless we do that, the only people they're hearing from are psychists, advocates for youth, Planned Parenthood, all of which who have a ton of money that they're pumping at legislators to say, I want you to pass this bill. This bill is so great. This is about healthy relationships. You believe in healthy relationships, don't you? Well, this is the healthy relationship bill. Okay, we already have refusal skills. We talked about that. Oh, yeah, we need to teach skills to get them out of situations as fast as possible, right? Not, oh yeah, well, I guess I do like it when you touch me there. Not necessarily there. Try there. Oh yeah, I'll consent to that. You know what I mean? It's just like ridiculous. Just say no, right? We're all teaching our kids, say no. Do not touch me, right? You tell them not to touch you. That's what a parent is teaching their kids. Okay, so we don't teach consent. We already went through that. Parental rights in Utah are awesome. And this is the last thing I'll say, because I know we're at the very, very end, and I want to make sure you guys get questions answered. But it all goes back to that there are two different philosophies in this world right now. The philosophy that parents know what's best for their children, and the philosophy that the state or the government knows what's best for your family and your children. The government believes that your children are sexual beings and they have a right to their feelings, they have a right to explore because they have a right to that. The parents believe they know their children the best. They know how to best educate them and coach them and keep them safe and protect them, right? So there are two philosophies. Last year in the 2021, a few months ago, this resolution came up on the floor, basically saying that the parent is the primary educator of their child and ought to be the primary educator of their child and has the right to be because the parent knows their child the best, okay? So this is validating parental rights, validating Utah code because Utah has some awesome laws in place about honoring parents because Utah puts a lot of value on families, right? So I just want you to look at this. Okay, this is the link that shows the very sweet speech that was given in support of this resolution about why parents should be the primary educators and that the state is secondary in nature, okay? I want you to look at this list. Look at who voted for it and look at who voted against it. And ask yourselves, why in the Sam hell someone would vote against this and say that the state should be the primary educator of your child and that they have the right because they know what's best. So I want you to know how your legislator is voting. And you ought to ask them why they believe that way. And if they're not voting the way that represents you and your best interest, please consider voting someone else in, because these are your children. You know them best. You know what's right for them. And if these people have it their way, then they're going to start dictating how everything that's taught to your child because they believe that they know what's best. Now this goes all the way back. Oh, and this is the Senate. These are the senators that voted against it. So senators that voted for it, that you were the primary educator, senators that voted against it. And you start to see a pattern, right? That the people who are always voting against these things are the people who believe the government knows best, okay? And you need to understand that because they sincerely believe that they know what is best for your child because they were a former educator or because they've been in government a long time and they know what's best. But they believe they know better than you do about what's best for your child. So you may want to decide whether you want your legislator representing your voice in government and they need to know you're a constituent. Okay, so the best interest of a child is actually a phrase that comes from the UN, the United Nations Declaration. And the United States is only one of 2 nations who did not sign this declaration because the United States says we have a constitution and we live by our constitution, not by the UN Declaration. So, and part of our constitution is that parents have the right to decide what's best for their child. So the US did not sign in on this idea of the child's rights, but that's what's going on a global scale. And you saw that in the video, that the global narrative is we should go with what's in the best interest of the child. And the best interest of the child is that they should be able to explore their sexuality because their sexuality may not be validated appropriately at home. So in the name of inclusion and social justice, the government needs to decide what's best for your child and make sure that your child's best interests are protected. So that's the narrative. There's a video, I won't play it, but this is what it says in the video. It's by a famous law professor in the United States who says that the state needs to be the ultimate guarantor of a child's well-being. And this law professor is teaching upcoming attorneys this philosophy and this paradigm. So this is what's going on in the judicial system right now, is that they are teaching that the state has the best interest of the child and the state has the right to your child, not the parent. And then these attorneys learn the law through this paradigm. And then those attorneys go on to be judges who adjudicate child rights cases. So you can see where this is going on a global scale, right? That it's going more towards the best interest of a child and less about the family and the parents, right? So this is a for reals, I'm not lying comment that was on a Parents' Right article. My understanding is that children are their own individuals, but because of their age are wards of the state. The state then decides who can and can't have custody. Parents have no ownership or attachment other than what the state bestows upon them. And this is why CPS can remove a child from any home at any time if they don't like what you're teaching your kid. So this is the narrative that's starting to come through the United States. This is kind of like what goes on with comprehensive sex ed in the idea that for social change, that children, or it's the best interest of a child, right? And what they want. Does that make sense? So I'm just kind of trying to show you what the trend or the philosophy is so that you guys can understand and start to figure out, like, who do you want to vote for? What do you want your child to be taught? Who has their best interest in mind, you or the state? Like, who can take care of your child better, you or the state? So these are, I know it kind of gets really deep, but I think it's really important to understand that these are the philosophies that are being pushed right now and a lot of different things. And they're 2 camps and they're mutually exclusive. But do you believe that the family is the most important unit of society, or do you believe in the government, right? Because some people really do believe that. And that's why I was from Power to Parent. That's why Utah Parents United exists, is to give parents a support group where we can help educate each other, because we believe that we know our children the best, right? And so we're fighting for what's best for our children because we know what's best for our children. And so that's why we want to give you guys the information that you need to make the best decisions that you can for your family. So that's why we're here. No one's paying us to be here. We're doing it because we're pissed off, right? So hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. That's how I usually start it out, is like, you know what? Like, I'm mad that you want to try to teach my kindergartner how to masturbate. And so I'm going to do something about it. And so I would say, you know, make sure you're signed up with us for email updates, text updates, because we really have to work together. We have to work together. We have to do something. This is not a passive thing. If you believe that you know your child the best and you want to retain the rights to do what's best for them, you have to get actively involved, because you're starting to see what's the direction the tides are turning, that people believe the state has a, you know, is better equipped to teach your kids than you. Do you guys have any questions on that? Comments, concerns, clean jokes, anything like that?
So there's some questions online.
Okay.
For those of us at home, where can we find this information about how our representatives voted on this? We can't see the slides clearly.
Oh, okay.
I'm sending the link to all of them.
Okay, so Brooke said she's sending the link to you where you can access this slideshow for the PowerPoints, and so that you can see. But and just so you know, in general, you guys can at any time look up this on le.utah.gov, le.utah.gov, and that tells you, you can go in and search any bill. And when you open up that bill, there will be a link that says status. And when you click on status, it will show you the votes of your reps. So hopefully you guys learned something from the presentation about knowing how your representatives are voting.
There's one more question.
Yeah.
Which resolution was that you referred to?
That was a joint resolution, HCR 8. HCR 8.
That's the one about parents and kids, right?
That's that parents are the primary educators of their children, and that the state should have a secondary role in educating your child.
That is not, that's just a non-binding resolution.
It's already in
It's not-
state law. They
Okay,
just
so
did
it's
the
just
resolution to reaffirm and support our
Yeah.
state law, because they see the philosophies coming up and they wanted to reaffirm it in Utah.
Yeah. So a resolution is generally, hey, we have a concern. We're seeing some trends. We want to reaffirm our stance as a legislature on where we stand on things. But some people think, oh no, we should have the state as the primary educators. But here's an interesting fact that I'm just going to throw in. That what happens when the state takes control? Like a study by Johns Hopkins, children who are in foster care are 4 times more likely to be sexually abused. And trafficking. Nationally, 86% of child sex trafficking victims were under the care of social services when they went missing. So the state has the best interest of your child in mind, right? And they know what's best, but here's what the statistics say when the state really is in charge. So it goes back to, who do you want raising your kids? Do you want the state raising them, or do you want to raise them? Do you want psychists to teach your kids their values, or do you want to teach your kids your values? And these are conversations that you seriously should have with your kids at home, asking them questions like, what did you learn today? What did your teacher tell you about this? How do you feel about that? Anything make you uncomfortable today? Anything you want to talk about? Because if you look at the statistics, and this was from like 2015, the Utah Department of Health did a study, and they found that the number one indicator of whether or not a child would commit suicide is whether they had family dinner. So it said that children who ate family dinner with their family on average of 5 times per week were half as likely to commit suicide. So it was a greater indicator than sports activity, a greater indicator than religion, of how much time their parents spent talking to them. So statistically, your kids are better off if you're talking to them than if someone else is. Okay.
So we don't want them eating dinner with the government then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that.
You got your own breakfast before you send them to school.
Yeah. Any other questions? Was that helpful? I mean, I know it's like a huge data dump and there's a lot of information, but I hope at least you can answer your questions as far as like, who do you want to have these conversations with your child? What do you want them to be taught? Like in my case, I've like told my husband that he's gonna take care of the sex ed for the boys. Like I'm taking care of my daughter and we're having those conversations, but for the boys, like, ask your dad about that. You know, that, I mean, I'm not perfect. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know that I love my kids and I know that my husband's awesome and that he'll do an awesome job talking to the boys because he's freaking hilarious. So I'm actually gonna sit behind the door and laugh when as I hear him having these conversations, but that's just me and my family. But you guys need to decide how you want to handle that in your family. So
It's actually really good for your kids to be able to feel comfortable talking with you, actually being comfortable asking you questions, even if it is awkward for you.
Oh, yeah, and my husband, he's been really cool about this because my little boys ask the funniest questions and they're seriously like hilarious and like, you gotta ask dad that. And he answers and he's hilarious about it. But I like it, and that's how we handle it in my family, and you just have to figure out what works for your family. But there are some great books. We should probably on our website put some recommended resources, like books that we as parents would recommend. That these are not Planned Parenthood's recommendations or psychists' recommendations of books, but these are like parent recommendations of what books to read with your kid about how to have the talk about birds and bees. And
I would really appreciate that because I actually looked at some books that some of the schools were using that were highly recommended, and I was kind of going through them, and I couldn't finish going through them because they made me sick.
Okay.
Is it for sex ed?
Yes.
Oh, so let me just say something really fast. To people here, hello, the link that Katie just posted for you, and this link right here takes you to the curriculum that was written that you could teach with your kids. So you get free access to this. So all of our classes, you can use this with your kids to teach sex ed. It talks about optimal health. It's the one that we created in California and are using there. And so I actually went through all of it, talked with the author, said, I don't want this in here. And so he adjusted it. So I fully trust this one. And now you have access to use with your kids.
Perfect, thank you.
And I think Brooke went through the opt-out letters with you guys, right? That if there's something that is being taught in a curriculum that you don't want your kids to learn, you can opt your kids out of that. And again, some parents are going to think it's too much. Some parents will think it's too little. Some parents will think it's just the right amount. And there's no judgment. Like if you don't want your kids to be taught about a certain thing, that's up to you, and you can opt them out of that, and that's your right. And if you want to supplement at home, that's your right too, right? On any topic. But you have the right as a parent to opt your child out and decide what you want your child to be taught about different subjects. Because Utah law is awesome, right? If it's honored. And if we can get our legislators to adhere to it, we're in an awesome position. But you guys need to know what's coming and need to know that it is coming, so that if you don't want it, you have to do something about it. Because I can't fight your battle for you. I can't email your legislators for you, right? I can email my legislator, who doesn't necessarily listen to me, but I can only lift where I stand, right? Okay, any other questions? Or if you're feeling a call to do something, maybe consider sitting on the Sex Ed Advisory Committee for your school district. Like look to see when the openings are coming up and say, hey, I want to be a parent who reviews this curriculum, right? So I had a friend in Vegas who did that. I saw her name pop up on the list where she was chosen to sit on that advisory committee out of like one of the 5th biggest school districts in the nation. And I called her, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome that you got on this list, like that you are on the advisory committee. And she's like, oh, I just decided no more shenanigans. This is not happening on my watch. And she is like tough. And so like, she is not a mama that you would want to cross paths with on anything. I'm scared of her even. And she is like the absolute person that I would want reviewing curriculum. So if you're feeling the call, that's one thing that you can do.
Where do you start to find out when that opening is, or?
Great question. You can go on your school district's website and they may post it there. You can email your school board representative, which is what I did. I was like, hey, where do I find the list of people that are on the Sex Ed Advisory Committee? So they should provide you that information. You could say, when is it up for review?
And they're public meetings, you can attend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they should be noticed on the public meeting notice, and if they're not, then you need to go to your school board. And our DSD wasn't doing that, and we caught them red-handed, and they very quickly changed because they were breaking open meeting law. in Davis School District, not posting the location and date of those public meetings. So you won't necessarily be able to speak, but you can attend as a parent
Yes.
and sit and watch them talk
yeah.
about the
Yeah.
curriculum, and then find out when you can get involved in one. So, I think and then I didn't know if any parents had questions about current legislation, laws, health orders, anything like that. At the end of this.
Okay.
At the end of this.
So any other sex ed questions or what topics we covered tonight?
I just want to say one thing about legislators. In our district, Melissa Ballard won by less than 100 votes. So those districts are meant to be small constitutionally, because that does give us power. Because she might not listen to me, but 20 or 30 people she'll listen to, because that could have swung the vote and she would lose. So you really do have a lot of power over your legislators. If you get a handful of friends, even 10 or 15 people to email that legislator, that matters a lot to them, because that could be the difference between them getting elected or not, and that's really all they care about.
You're right. That's where you say, I'm your constituent. It's my money. These are my kids, and I want you to vote this way or that way.
My choice.
My choice. Yep. Yeah. So thank you for that. We need to get him on some special projects. Like you seem like an angry parent. We need you. Right? Yeah.
No, you just scared me when I saw that we were 8 votes away from having my daughter learn about this crap. And that shocked me, because all of our friends are telling us, oh, that'll never happen in Utah, and they got their head in the sand.
Yeah.
And because of you guys, we learned that it can come to Utah. And I'm simultaneously angry about that, but I'm also grateful that
Thank
we know
you.
this now.
Well, and you can see Granite. I put Granite's slides up. So when you say, oh, that's not going to happen in Utah, well, it's happening in Granite.
And that's how I got in, is I was like, I'm done, I'm fine, head in the sand, Utah's awesome. And then they sent me Granite School Districts, and I put my head against the wall, and I said,
And see, I didn't even use like that nice of terms. Like, since being involved in this, my vocabulary has taken a colorful turn for the worst. And my husband is not happy about that. But I seriously do not know any other words to express my frustration about like what I have to deal with and what I have to look at. Because like in Nevada, I had to have my husband take my kids to the park one Sunday afternoon while my job was to look through the recommended websites of as far as like what they were recommending that teachers use in classrooms. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even say these words like with a straight face to my husband. And they want to like give this to kids in school. So it's here, it's knocking on our door. So all it takes is for good men to do nothing. Okay. So we need you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Thank you for signing up with us. Thank you for getting our email updates. Thank you for getting our text updates. A lot of times when people say, what can I do? I'm so angry, what can I do? And I say, it sounds stupid, but the number one thing that you need to do is email your legislator, email your school board rep. They need to have 1,000 emails from parents who say, I want you to vote no on this bill. Like, hey, I'm your constituent, I need you to vote no on this bill. So that's the single most important thing that you guys can do in this process, is just make sure when you get those calls to action that you follow through on those, that you don't think, oh, someone else is taking care of that. Oh, that won't happen here. That'll never pass.
And then you educate your neighbor.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the next thing. Like, who can you forward this? Like, look at these empty seats. Like, we should have 3 times the number of people in here, right? So, because people think, oh, that will never happen here. That's not gonna happen. So how do we get more people signed up? How do we get more people working on these calls to action?
Next week, and in 2 weeks, we're having Joel Thornton about how to best love our transgender youth, which means how to. Anyway, you'll come see. You really want to come see that, because the policies in schools right now are don't tell the parents.
So
those are the legitimate policies.
In the state of Utah.
yeah,
In the state of Utah, do not tell the parents.
I had a
So please come.
teacher call me and she said, I have to talk to you in confidence. I need you to guarantee that my name won't get out there. I'm like, absolutely, right? And she said, just so you know, I had a student come to me and say that they wanted to be referred to as this other gender and that I couldn't tell their parents. And so I asked my principal what I should do and asked the administrators, and they said, oh yeah, you know, if they don't want you to tell their parents, then you don't tell their parents. So that's another issue where it's like, okay, do you as a parent have the right to know what your child's choosing to do in school?
What happened to mandatory reporters? The teacher's a mandatory reporter. So,
Yeah, they can't take an aspirin without telling you,
yeah.
but they can.
Okay. Anyway, you guys, thank you for coming. Is everyone getting our text updates?
I'm not either.
Okay, let's get people signed up for text updates. So take out your phone real quick. I can give her.
You guys can come up here and do it.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. So if you, and think about who you can get here. Like what other friends do you have that you can get signed up? Yes, you can read her.
When I signed up today and it said that they only were allowing 100 people in the room. There's not 100 people here. Oh, sorry.
So
I just take a whole picture. I take a picture of the whole thing so I don't.
Good idea. Okay, yeah.